What is going on, YouTube people? Northeast Ohio Cards and Comics here. For a little football video today, as the season is about to kick off, that means the off-season has come to an end. And a question we all get often is, when is the best time to sell football? In the past, it was the run-up to the season starting. Sell right before the season starts. Get in, get out, do your thing. That's the advice I've given for a while and preached myself. I held a lot of football into the summer, waiting for the pop that this season never really came. Now, is this a unique thing for this season? I don't know. We'll find out. We'll have to see what happens next year. But the cycle is definitely different this year than last year. Now, last year had a lot of inflated COVID shenanigans in the marketplace, and maybe that had a little bit of effect on it. So, what was the actual best time to sell football if you bought during the dips of last year? That's what I wanted to dig into today. So I have about 8 or 9 cards pulled up. We're going to look at the entire offseason graph and see if we could find any trends that overlap. Spoilers, there is one. We'll get to it in a minute, but not necessarily everything falls in line with that. Now, what happens to the market going forward? We'll just have to wait and see once the season starts. But let's take a look backwards and see when was the best time to sell. With all that being said, like, comment, subscribe, and let's go ahead and dive in. First up, Baker, PSA 10 Prism. If you would have bought, and most of these charts and graphs, with the exception of one, I started from February 1st, just to have a nice clean line. That is about 1 week before the Super Bowl. The exception to this, and I'll talk about it when we get there, is Mahomes. I actually started his on like the 8th or 9th of February because it was the day after the Super Bowl, because he was still seeing a run up because he was still playing. My boy Baker here, right after the Super Bowl, around a little over $200 for a PSA 10 Prism, around $250. We have a 240, a 250, another 225, a 275, a 220, 250. We'll call it 250 there for a little period in February. Starts to creep up, keeps creeping. Here in mid-March, it jumps from 285 to around 350. And then from mid-March until early May, it gets all the way up to around $600. $575, $600. We'll just kind of take the averages there. So here's kind of a dead period. You know, it's the Super Bowl. The Browns are forgotten about. They lost to the Chiefs. Kind of some nice slow and steady growth. Mid-March is when NFL free agency kicked off, and we see a spike. Then once again, it's slow and steady growth as we lead up into the NFL draft, which is around here. I believe it was May 1st was the NFL draft this year. And we could see around that time was the peak prices. Then it's pulled way back pretty quick, actually. Kind of leveled out at around 400 to 450. Ran at that price for a while. And now actually in the lead up to the season here, the last month or so, it's actually down. Down to 340, 350. 380. So it's actually pulled back quite a bit, as my guess is people are starting to unload prior to the season starting in this case. Maybe they bought back here, realized prices didn't spike, and they want to get out of it before the season starts because they have concerns about Baker or whatever. So in Baker's case, the best place to sell would have been around the NFL draft. You could have bought in here for about 225 to 250. Or even earlier than this, probably, if I run this backwards, more right after they got eliminated, basically. And then sold around the draft for, let's not take the high number, let's kind of take, right in here. Let's call it 500. You could have easily gotten 500 for this card, or over 500 in most cases, for almost a good 2-week window there where they were selling. A couple weird ones here, way down here. Not sure what happened on these days where they went for 420. But you can clearly see there was many sales above that $500 mark. So you could have bought in here for low 2s to mid 2s and almost doubled up your money if you sold here. If you held out to now and you bought back here, you could still make a little bit of money, but not as much. The peak was late April, early May. All right, let's look at Josh Allen. Huh, that looks pretty similar, doesn't it? Right after the Super Bowl, this was a $720 card. It was still on its way down right post or right before the Super Bowl. It got down to about 650, 670 in the week leading up to the Super Bowl. Goes back up over 700, slowly creeps, sitting around mid sevens, 750-ish, multiple sales there. Gets a little jump once again early to mid March around NFL free agency. Gets a little spike, flattens out, does its thing. We get to the end of March. Now we're starting to talk NFL draft a bunch. It spikes up a little bit earlier than Baker, but in mid-April. And actually, I think this is this when he signed his contract extension? Or did that just recently? I don't remember when he signed his contract extension. I think that actually might have been just more recently. Spikes up, goes all the way up to 1,200, floats around 1,200 leading up to the NFL draft. And then once again, NFL draft on May 1st. So in this window, actually starts coming down a little sooner. On May 3rd, 1K, then drops down to 900, drops down again, sits around 800, goes back up to around 9, kind of floats around there, drops down to, what is this down to here in July? 750, then spikes back up again. I actually think this is when he signed his contract extension, was late in the summer. Goes back up over 950 and has been at about 900-ish throughout the rest of the offseason. So general trend line, what we see is kind of the same thing. The dates don't line up specifically, but peaked right around or right before the NFL draft. If I throw this one on as well. So here's Baker and Allen's side by side. You could see the same run-up pattern. Now, Allen's happened sooner and then leveled out for a while and then came back down again. Baker's follows the same general trend lines, a shorter spike up, didn't stay up there as long, and then comes back down again shortly after, just like Allen's does. Let's look at another one from the same year, Lamar Jackson. PSA 10 base Prism. Beginning of February, it was, in the lead up to the Super Bowl, about a $700 card. At or around the Super Bowl, it actually had already gone back up to around $850. 879, 900-ish, 950, a bunch of 850s here in April. Now, this one does not follow any of the same patterns. This stays pretty high and cruises at around $900, and it's actually recently started coming down. We see here from the end of August in the early September, it's actually come down quite a bit. Wow, I didn't realize that got down that low. That happened fast. Down to $620 right here on September 6th, right before the season's about to start. Now, this one is a little different. Once again, if I pull up Allen's chart here, because these cards are similarly priced, you can see Allen gets the big spike and then comes back down again. The only thing that's different here with Lamar that you got to take this slightly differently is because his population count is skewed compared to the other people in his class. His PSA 10 pop is 600. Josh Allen's is 1,100. Baker's is almost 900. There was a weird thing with the condition of all Lamar's Prism base cards that caused it to grade extremely tough. I forget what it was, if it was a print line or a dimple or a scratch similar to the 17 Mahomes Prism. But there's an issue on a lot of Lamar Jackson cards, which has kept pop counts down because they are an extremely tough grade. So I think that makes him a little less volatile because it is a little bit of a lower population card. But his chart, once it spikes up, basically stays more stable until just the last couple weeks here, where this has really dove off. Let's jump to the 2019 class. Take a look at Kyler Murray. His is another interesting one. Once again, same thing. Early February, around $400. Slowly creeps up, peaks in mid-April at $650. That runs through until right before the NFL draft. This was down to about $535. And then right during the NFL draft, it actually went down, spiked back up, went down, and then kind of reestablishes itself here. We'll call it $450. And has actually kept creeping down since. This is all the way down to $350 on September 6th. Leading into the season. It's actually $50 cheaper than what it was back in early February. So very interesting there as well with where this card's gone. But once again, if I overlay, I'm going to overlay Baker on top of it because they're similar price points. See the same thing. Lows in February, creep up, creep up, creep up. They spike at different times, but they both spike in the spring. Baker's a little past the NFL draft, Kyler's a little before, and then immediately pull back and start trending down towards the start of the season. Let's switch over, look at a different player. Aaron Rodgers, Topps Chrome. Pretty low pop on this one, but you do still see a semi-similar thing. Now, his, right after the Super Bowl, was sitting at around 5K. It does dip down to a little bit in late February to 3.5, spikes back up again to 5, and then it kind of sits at around 4. Couple rogue sales here, but basically sits at around 4, pulls back a little bit into the summer, gets a couple 2.6K there. That was a really good deal. A 3, a 3, a 2, 4.2, a 3, and then back up to 4.5 here right before the season starts. So once again, very low pop on this one, 236, but you do see the same overarching trend where that early to mid-spring was the best time to probably sell this because it does slow down a little bit and it does look like it's starting to pick back up again. Russell Wilson Topps Chrome, PSA 10. Once again, very similar chart. Right after the Super Bowl, or right before the Super Bowl, rather, very low at around 670. Peaks up kind of quickly, gets up to 950, then gets all the way up to 1200. Most sales will call around 1000. This card sits at 1000 to just under 1000 throughout March and into mid-April. And then prior to the NFL draft, actually starts to come down. Late May, it's already down to 750. As we head into the summer around 4th of July, it's down to 620. We get into here, it's down to 550, 500 even. 500 sale here, 560 sale here. Does get a little bit of a run up here leading into September. Gets up to 700. And then basically stays right around 700. We do have one sale there back at 629. But we do see a run up there and then levels back off again. I'm guessing this is the case. This is around, I think, when I did the video on it, where I talked about 500 for his Topps Chrome just seems ridiculously cheap. So some other people probably saw that too and bought up a few, driving the price up a little bit. Pretty low pop on this at only 1,000, so there's not a ton of them out there. But still seems pretty cheap considering the level of player that he is. Let's look at Mahomes. Once again, a very similar pattern. Now, this one I had to push back a week because of the Super Bowl. So this is right after his prices stabilized, right after the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl, I believe, was the 7th. Monday was the 8th, and then I gave it one more day because there were some weird pricing fluctuations there on that day after the Super Bowl. So we basically see his offseason started with this being an almost 12K card. And it essentially sat there in varying degrees throughout March and into April. Through April, it dips down a little bit around the NFL draft, goes to 10.5, then immediately goes back to 12. But then from basically mid to late April, let's call it like an 11K card. Currently, right now, the most recent sale, 8.8. So down almost 3K, 2 to 3K on this card. And the PSA 9, if I turn off the 10, actually follows the exact same pattern. This actually took a little longer to crash down. So this is still its post-Super Bowl crash. But on 212 was its basement at 2.4K. Bounces back a little bit, but basically floats around 2.5K for a while, then creeps down, creeps back up again, creeps down again. Most recent sale at this, 2.3K. So, you know, if you bought here at 2.5, 2.4, you know, you're not that bad off with 2.3, but just prior to that was 2K even. There are plenty of sales here very close to 2K. We even see one at 1,900. That seems to be the lowest. One 1,800, one 1,900. Those two seem to be the same lowest, or the two lowest prices that card hit. But we do see the same thing. You know, if I start this chart from when his prices bottomed out post Super Bowl, which I think is a fair comparison to make, you'll see that same pattern, the creep up into the spring and then the pullback. And I also wanted to pull his optic because whenever I look at Mahomes, I actually, for the purposes of comparisons, I actually like to use the optic more than the Prism. The Prism is so expensive and so low pop and such a premium's put on the 10. It's an astronomically priced card. I think it gives you a tricky representation of what the market's doing with him to a degree. So I always like to go back to the optic. Once again, this card bottomed out right after the Super Bowl at around 2K. Did bounce back up pretty quickly to 2,200, which isn't a huge bounce back. Pulls back again down to 1,750, leading up to the NFL draft in the mid-April. Gets back up to around 2.3K, pulls back down again. We see a bunch of sales here around 1,700, even a few under. There was this late May run here with a couple $1,400 sales. That seems like a deal. Someone really got a steal on that because even at current day prices, it's at 1,900, which that card's actually been creeping back up again slowly. So you see here in the late summer, it kind of bottomed out around 1,700. Various different ups and downs here, but the bottoms were about 1,600-ish. And it's currently sitting at 1,900. But similar pattern, kind of bounced back a little quicker, went down, went back up again. More of a roller coaster ride on this one. This one actually, I said similar pattern, but it's actually not. Came up, came back down, came up, came back down, came up, came back down, came on its way back up again leading into the season. So so what can we draw from this? In general, it feels like the best time to have sold. It does vary a little bit player to player. Roughly speaking, though, almost every player had a window from early to mid-April to sometime in mid to late May. Now, some of those windows were shorter, some were longer, some were in early April and were gone by May. Some started in April, went into May. Some didn't start until May. But basically, spring, with some margin of error, 2 weeks plus or minus, was pretty much the peak of the offseason football market. And then for pretty much almost every player, other than maybe Mahomes' optic, it's basically been downhill since then. And in a lot of these cases, really downhill the last couple of weeks. So there's no great clear answer. There is a general overall macro level pattern, but each individual player, their peaks were all slightly different. So you really just have to watch the individual player trends and kind of just use your gut of, okay, why is this going up? Is this sustainable? And what does the next few months look like when it comes to selling? It gets tricky. Now, part of the pullback could have been because the entire sports card market pulled back throughout that same time period. You know, that spring into summer when the world started opening back up again, that's when the NBA market saw a huge pullback in April, May, June. So is that just a carryover in the football? Things were kind of heading in the right direction. Card prices were going up in April and May, and then the general market took an entire downturn, and that funneled its way in the football, which caused this to happen like this. If that didn't happen, say the whole sports card market didn't see its big pullback in the late spring, early summer, would the NFL card market have kept going up, though probably slower with some little ups and downs, but in general, would it have kept an upward trend leading into the season like you typically see in an off season? That's what we don't know. We still have not really had a true regular off season between COVID and the weird market shifts and all that stuff. This, I mentioned it on, I think, when I had Steve and Dakota on Sunday night, or one of the live streams recently. I don't remember whose channel it was on, whether it was mine or theirs. That this is really our first time through in the new world. You know, we're in COVID protocols, for what they are. The world's adjusted to it to a degree. Some places better than others. The market has kind of shaken itself out now. Like, we had the big run-ups in prices. We've had major pullbacks in prices. And the market does seem to have leveled out in general. Yeah, some stuff's still going up, some stuff's still going down. But in general, the markets seem to be figuring themselves out. So we're in a more stable place now. I don't think we're as volatile as we were 6 months ago, a year and a half ago, when the slightest thing would cause card prices to quadruple in value overnight. We're not seeing that anymore. So it'll be interesting to see as we work through this next cycle, as we run through this NBA offseason and the run up to its season, what happens. As the NFL season begins and plays out, what happens in season. As the run up to the next baseball season happens. And then we kind of rinse and repeat the offseason cycles as we move throughout football, ending and then, heading into its offseason. Can we start to see patterns emerge now that we are kind of through the crazy times of the last year and a half, and maybe things are getting back to a little more normalcy? Don't know. So that's all I have for you guys and girls today. Like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube stuff down below, and we will catch you guys and girls on the next one. Peace.